Chapter 3 of the Aspern Papers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Our house is very far from the centre, but the little canal is very comme il faut. It's the sweetest corner of Venice, and I can imagine nothing more charming, I hastened to reply. The old lady's voice was very thin and weak, but it had an agreeable, cultivated murmur, and there was wonder in the thought that that individual note had been in Jeffrey Aspern's ear. "Please to sit down there, I hear very well," she said quietly, as if perhaps I had been shouting at her, and the chair she pointed to was at a certain distance. I took possession of it, telling her that I was perfectly aware that I had intruded, that I had not been properly introduced and could only throw myself upon her indulgence. Perhaps the other lady, the one I had had the honor of seeing the day before, would have explained to her about the garden. That was literally what had given me courage to take a step so unconventional. I had fallen in love at sight with the whole place. She herself probably was so used to it that she did not know the impression it was capable of making on a stranger, and I felt it was really a case to risk something. Was her own kindness in receiving me a sign that I was not wholly out in my calculation? It would render me extremely happy to think so. I could give her my word of honor that I was a most respectable, inoffensive person, and that as an inmate they would barely be conscious of my existence. I would conform to any regulations, any restrictions, if they would only let me enjoy the garden. Moreover, I should be delighted to give her references, guarantees. They would be of the very best, both in Venice and in England as well as in America. She listened to me in perfect stillness, and I felt that she was looking at me with great attention, though I could see only the lower part of her bleached and shriveled face. Independently of the refining process of old age, it had a delicacy which once must have been great. She had been very fair, she'd had a wonderful complexion. She was silent a little after I had ceased speaking. Then she inquired, "If you are so fond of a garden, why don't you go to terra firma, where there are so many far better than this?" "Oh, it's the combination," I answered, smiling, and then with rather a flight of fancy. "It's the idea of a garden in the middle of the sea." "It's not in the middle of the sea. You can't see the water." I stared a moment, wondering whether she wished to convict me of fraud. "Can't see the water? Why, dear madam, I can come up to the very gate in my boat." She appeared inconsequent, for she said vaguely in reply to this, "Yes, if you have got a boat. I haven't any. It's many years since I have been in one of the gondolas." She uttered these words as if the gondolas were a curious faraway craft which she knew only by hearsay. "Let me assure you of the pleasure with which I would put mine at your service!" I exclaimed. I had scarcely said this, however, before I became aware that the speech was in questionable taste and might also do me the injury of making me appear too eager, too possessed of a hidden motive. But the old woman remained impenetrable, and her attitude bothered me by suggesting that she had a fuller vision of me than I had of her. She gave me no thanks for my somewhat extravagant offer, but remarked that the lady I had seen the day before was her niece. She would presently come in. She had asked her to stay away a little on purpose, because she herself wished to see me at first alone. She relapsed into silence, and I asked myself why she had judged this necessary, and what was coming yet; also whether I might venture on some judicious remark in praise of her companion. I went so far as to say that I should be delighted to see her again. She had been so very courteous to me, considering how odd she must have thought me; a declaration which drew from Miss Bordereau another of her whimsical speeches. "She has very good manners. I bred her up myself." I was on the point of saying that accounted for the easy grace of the niece, but I arrested myself in time, and the next moment the old woman went on, "I don't care who you may be. I don't want to know. It signifies very little today." This had all the air of being a formula of dismissal, as if her next words would be that I might take myself off now that she had had the amusement of looking on the face of such a monster of indiscretion. Therefore I was all the more surprised when she added, with her soft, venerable quaver, "You may have as many rooms as you like, if you will pay a good deal of money." I hesitated but for a single instant, long enough to ask myself what she meant in particular by this condition. First it struck me that she must have really a large sum in her mind; then I reasoned quickly that her idea of a large sum would probably not correspond to my own. My deliberation, I think, was not so visible as to diminish the promptitude with which I replied. "I will pay with pleasure and of course in advance whatever you may think it is proper to ask me." "Well then, 1,000 francs a month," she rejoined instantly, while her baffling green shade continued to cover her attitude. The figure, as they say, was startling, and my logic had been at fault. The sum she had mentioned was, by the Venetian measure of such matters, exceedingly large. There was many an old palace in an out of the way corner that I might on such terms have enjoyed by the year. But so far as my small means allowed I was prepared to spend the money, and my decision was quickly taken. I would pay her with a smiling face what she asked, but in that case I would give myself the compensation of extracting the papers from her for nothing. Moreover, if she had asked 5 times as much I should have risen to the occasion. So odious would it have appeared to me to stand chaffering with Aspern's Juliana. It was queer enough to have a question of money with her at all. I assured her that her views perfectly met my own and that on the morrow I should have the pleasure of putting 3 months' rent into her hand. She received this announcement with serenity and with no apparent sense that after all it would be becoming of her to say that I ought to see the rooms first. This did not occur to her, and indeed her serenity was mainly what I wanted. Our little bargain was just concluded when the door opened and the younger lady appeared on the threshold. As soon as Miss Bordereau saw her niece she cried out almost gaily, "He will give 3,000! 3,000 tomorrow!" Miss Tita stood still with her patient eyes turning from one of us to the other. Then she inquired, scarcely above her breath, "Do you mean francs?" "Did you mean francs or dollars?" the old woman asked me at this. "I think francs were what you said," I answered, smiling. "That is very good," said Miss Tita, as if she had become conscious that her own question might have looked overreaching. "What do you know? You are ignorant," Miss Bordereau remarked, not with acerbity but with a strange soft coldness. "Yes, of money, certainly of money!" Miss Tita hastened to exclaim. "I am sure you have your own branches of knowledge," I took the liberty of saying genially. There was something painful to me, somehow, in the turn the conversation had taken in the discussion of the rent. "She had a very good education when she was young. I looked into that myself," said Miss Bordereau. Then she added, "But she has learned nothing since." "I have always been with you," Miss Tita rejoined very mildly and evidently with no intention of making an epigram. "Yes, but for that," her aunt declared with much more satirical force. She evidently meant that but for that her niece would never have got on at all, the point of the observation however being lost on Miss Tita, though she blushed at hearing her story revealed to a stranger. Miss Bordereau went on, addressing herself to me. "And at what time will you come with the money?" "The sooner the better. If it suits you I will come at noon." "I am always here, but I have my hours," said the old woman, as if her convenience were not to be taken for granted. "You mean the times when you receive?" "I never receive. But I will see you at noon when you come with the money." "Very good, I shall be punctual," and I added, "May I shake hands with you on our contract?" I thought there ought to be some little form; it would make me really feel easier, for I foresaw that there would be no other. Besides, though Miss Bordereau could not today be called personally attractive, and there was something even in her wasted antiquity that bade one stand at one's distance, I felt an irresistible desire to hold in my own for a moment the hand that Jeffrey Aspern had pressed. For a minute she made no answer, and I saw that my proposal failed to meet with her approbation. She indulged in no movement of withdrawal, which I half expected. She only said coldly, "I belong to a time when that was not the custom." I felt rather snubbed, but I exclaimed good humoredly to Miss Tita, "Oh, you will do as well." I shook hands with her while she replied with a small flutter, "Yes, yes, to show it's all arranged." "Shall you bring the money in gold?" Miss Bordereau demanded as I was turning to the door. I looked at her for a moment. "Aren't you a little afraid, after all, of keeping such a sum as that in the house?" It was not that I was annoyed at her avidity, but I was really struck with the disparity between such a treasure and such scanty means of guarding it. "Whom should I be afraid of if I am not afraid of you?" she asked with her shrunken grimness. "Ah well," said I, laughing, "I shall be in point of fact a protector, and I will bring gold if you prefer." "Thank you," the old woman returned with dignity and with an inclination of her head which evidently signified that I might depart. I passed out of the room, reflecting that it would not be easy to circumvent her. As I stood in the sala again I saw that Miss Tita had followed me, and I supposed that as her aunt had neglected to suggest that I should take a look at my quarters it was her purpose to repair the omission. But she made no such suggestion; she only stood there with a dim though not a languid smile and with an effect of irresponsible, incompetent youth which was almost comically at variance with the faded facts of her person. She was not infirm, like her aunt, but she struck me as still more helpless because her inefficiency was spiritual, which was not the case with Miss Bordereau's. I waited to see if she would offer to show me the rest of the house, but I did not precipitate the question, inasmuch as my plan was from this moment to spend as much of my time as possible in her society. I only observed at the end of a minute, "I have had better fortune than I hoped. It was very kind of her to see me. Perhaps you said a good word for me." "It was the idea of the money," said Miss Tita. "And did you suggest that?" "I told her that you would perhaps give a good deal." "What made you think that?" "I told her I thought you were rich." "And what put that idea in your head?" "I don't know the way you talked." "Dear me, I must talk differently now," I declared. "I'm sorry to say it's not the case." "Well," said Miss Tita, "I think that in Venice the forestieri in general often give a great deal for something that after all isn't much." She appeared to make this remark with a comforting intention, to wish to remind me that if I had been extravagant I was not really foolishly singular. We walked together along the sala, and as I took its magnificent measure I said to her that I was afraid it would not form a part of my quartiere. Were my rooms by chance to be among those that opened into it? "Not if you go above, on the second floor," she answered with a little startled air, as if she had rather taken for granted that I would know my proper place. "And I infer that's where your aunt would like me to be." "She said your apartments ought to be very distinct." "That certainly would be best." And I listened with respect while she told me that up above I was free to take whatever I liked, that there was another staircase, but only from the floor on which we stood, and that to pass from it to the garden story or to come up to my lodging I should have in effect to cross the great hall. This was an immense point gained; I foresaw that it would constitute my whole leverage in my relations with the two ladies. When I asked Miss Tita how I was to manage at present to find my way up she replied with an access of that sociable shyness which constantly marked her manner, "Perhaps you can't. I don't see unless I should go with you." She evidently had not thought of this before. We ascended to the upper floor and visited a long succession of empty rooms. The best of them looked over the garden; some of the others had a view of the blue lagoon above the opposite rough tiled house tops. They were all dusty and even a little disfigured with long neglect, but I saw that by spending a few hundred francs I should be able to convert 3 or 4 of them into a convenient habitation. My experiment was turning out costly, yet now that I had all but taken possession I ceased to allow this to trouble me. I mentioned to my companion a few of the things that I should put in, but she replied, rather more precipitately than usual, that I might do exactly what I liked. She seemed to wish to notify me that the Misses Bordereau would take no overt interest in my proceedings. I guessed that her aunt had instructed her to adopt this tone, and I may as well say now that I came afterward to distinguish perfectly, as I believed, between the speeches she made on her own responsibility and those the old lady imposed upon her. She took no notice of the unswept conditions of the rooms and indulged in no explanations nor apologies. I said to myself that this was a sign that Juliana and her niece, disenchanting idea, were untidy persons with a low Italian standard, but I afterward recognized that a lodger who had forced an entrance had no locus standi as a critic. We looked out of a good many windows, for there was nothing within the rooms to look at, and still I wanted to linger. I asked her what several objects in the prospect might be, but in no case did she appear to know. She was evidently not familiar with the view; it was as if she had not looked at it for years, and I presently saw that she was too preoccupied with something else to pretend to care for it. Suddenly she said, the remark was not suggested, "I don't know whether it will make any difference to you, but the money is for me." "The money?" "The money you are going to bring." "Why, you'll make me wish to stay here 2 or 3 years." I spoke as benevolently as possible, though it had begun to act on my nerves that with these women so associated with Aspern the pecuniary question should constantly come back. "That would be very good for me," she replied, smiling. "You put me on my honor." She looked as if she failed to understand this, but went on. "She wants me to have more. She thinks she is going to die." "Ah, not soon, I hope!" I exclaimed with genuine feeling. I had perfectly considered the possibility that she would destroy her papers on the day she should feel her end really approach. I believed that she would cling to them till then, and I think I had an idea that she read Aspern's letters over every night, or at least pressed them to her withered lips. I would have given a good deal to have a glimpse of the latter spectacle. I asked Miss Tita if the old lady were seriously ill, and she replied that she was only very tired; she had lived so very, very long. That was what she said herself; she wanted to die for a change. Besides, all her friends were dead long ago; either they ought to have remained or she ought to have gone. That was another thing her aunt often said; she was not at all content. "But people don't die when they like, do they?" Miss Tita inquired. I took the liberty of asking why, if there was actually enough money to maintain them both, there would not be more than enough in case of her being left alone. She considered this difficult problem a moment, and then she said, "Oh, well, you know she takes care of me. She thinks that when I'm alone I shall be a great fool; I shall not know how to manage." "I should have supposed that you took care of her. I'm afraid she is very proud." "Why, have you discovered that already?" Miss Tita cried with the glimmer of an illumination in her face. "I was shut up with her there for a considerable time, and she struck me, she interested me extremely. It didn't take me long to make my discovery. She won't have much to say to me while I'm here." "No, I don't think she will," my companion averred. "Do you suppose she has some suspicion of me?" Miss Tita's honest eyes gave me no sign that I had touched a mark. "I shouldn't think so, letting you in after all so easily." "Oh, so easily she has covered her risk. But where is it that one could take an advantage of her?" "I oughtn't to tell you if I knew, ought I?" and Miss Tita added before I had time to reply to this, smiling dolefully, "Do you think we have any weak points?" "That's exactly what I'm asking. You would only have to mention them for me to respect them religiously." She looked at me, at this, with that air of timid but candid and even gratified curiosity with which she had confronted me from the first, and then she said, "There is nothing to tell. We are terribly quiet. I don't know how the days pass. We have no life." "I wish I might think that I should bring you a little." "Oh, we know what we want," she went on. "It's all right." There were various things I desired to ask her. How in the world they did live. whether they had any friends or visitors, any relations in America or in other countries. But I judged such an inquiry would be premature; I must leave it to a later chance. "Well, don't you be proud," I contented myself with saying. "Don't hide from me altogether." "Oh, I must stay with my aunt," she returned, without looking at me; and at the same moment, abruptly, without any ceremony of parting, she quitted me and disappeared, leaving me to make my own way downstairs. I remained a while longer, wandering about the bright desert (the sun was pouring in) of the old house, thinking the situation over on the spot. Not even the pattering little serva came to look after me, and I reflected, after all, this treatment showed confidence. Chapter 4